In 2016, the United Kingdom had approximately 9.4 million residents who were born abroad, accounting for about 14% of the total population. In 2022, there were over 10.7 million immigrant residents, accounting for 16% of the population. But wasn't immigration supposed to go down? It's time to face the facts. The Leave campaign lied to us. Brexit was built on a foundation of broken promises, and now that the people of the UK are catching on, it's too late to go back. So, how did an entire nation fall for a bold-faced lie? Did the UK government even try to hold up their end of the bargain? Stand on a soapbox in the middle of Oxford Street, the busiest street in London, and start talking about immigration. Guaranteed, more than a few people will come up for a debate, some nodding their heads in agreement and some rolling their eyes in disapproval. The fact of the matter is that immigration might just be one of the most polarizing topics in the United Kingdom, and it's been that way for a very, very long time now. The graph you're looking at right now was prepared by the Migration Observatory in 2023, following the results of the 2021 to 2022 consensus. This was a couple of years after Brexit had taken place. The consensus right before this was conducted in 2011. Obviously, one major event took place between then and now, Brexit. Take a look at the graph yourself for a minute. What do you see here? Migration had increased, yes. And while that might have been a surprise for some people, it wasn't a surprise for everyone. Historically, the United Kingdom has opened its borders to a large number of immigrants. Brent, Westminster, Chelsea, Kensington, and Middlesbrough are just some of the many examples of places with high immigrant populations. But this was supposed to change. Brexit was supposed to give the people of the United Kingdom something they've been longing for, their autonomy back. For years, the people of the UK had raised their voices against the unfair policies of the European Union that had undermined British identity and sovereignty. Of the many ways it had done so, the EU was blamed for its reported open door policy. Members of the Leave campaign argued that the EU had become overly reliant on the hospitality of the British public and was sending immigrants its way. It was time for them to take back control of their borders, but based on the data from the Migration Observatory, they hadn't quite done that. Let's take a look at the graph again and talk about a paradoxical shift here. Do you notice how net migration has increased, but immigration from one specific front has decreased? That's right. While more and more people were entering the United Kingdom, nationalities from within the EU27 were dwindling. While Polish and Romanian immigrants remained in high numbers, EU immigration as a whole had decreased. Leaving the Union had given the United Kingdom back control of its borders, if it ever lost it in the first place, but it seemed like they weren't keeping those borders closed. Why? Despite the negative connotations attached to immigration and immigrants in some parts of the country, particularly evidenced during the 2016 referendum, why was it that the British were letting more people in? In 2023, The Independent discussed just this in their article titled "Brexit is clearly failing. It's time to stop lying about immigration." The subject matter is pretty self-explanatory, but the author cited the government's, then the Tory government's, own resources against them. For years, the Conservative narrative was clear. We're trying to reduce immigration to improve your quality of life, but the EU is forcing us to accept uncontrolled numbers. But the sources that disprove the Tory government's claim came from the Office for Budget Responsibility itself. The OBR works as the government's independent economic forecaster and has been used by members of the Leave campaign to justify their take on immigration. So, according to the OBR, net immigration was projected at around 240,000 per year, 40,000 higher than the forecasted for 2023. According to reports from 2024, these numbers only skyrocketed over the years, with some reports suggesting that 1 in every 6 people in the United Kingdom was born outside of the nation. A key point from the OBR was that work visas only accounted for around 20% of the visas issued in 2023. They even clearly stated that migrants arriving under the current system are likely to have lower workforce participation than they did before Brexit. The OBR also noted that the new post-Brexit immigration system wasn't as economically beneficial as the one the UK had under the EU. To make matters worse, one Brexit promise was that cutting immigration would lead to more jobs and higher pay for British workers, but the government recently lowered the salary threshold for foreign construction workers, making it cheaper to hire people from abroad. Ironically, the same sectors that were most vocal about leaving the EU, like farming, food production, and fishing, were the ones calling for more foreign workers from the time of the referendum. The NHS also suffered, as restrictions on foreign healthcare professionals had made it harder to fill vital roles. EU workers may have made up only 5% of the UK population, but they had represented 10% of its doctors by the time of the 2016 vote. They clearly benefited the health system rather than burdened it. The truth? Immigration was never the reason wages were stagnant, but that was the central myth that fueled Brexit.
We are the real people of this country, and we know.
One of the biggest myths of the Leave campaign was that the EU immigration was entirely unrestricted. In reality, EU citizens could only move to the UK if they were working, studying, or had enough resources and health coverage to avoid burdening the welfare system. That means Brexit was marketed as a solution to a problem that never really existed. Freedom of movement, the cornerstone of the EU's migration policy, was brought up in several discussions as a source of unchecked and uncontrolled immigration into the UK. To give you some context here, freedom of movement wasn't limited solely to the movement of people. It referred to the free movement of goods, services, and people from one EU member nation to another. Essentially, freedom of movement eliminated red tape and barriers that would have hindered the free flow of practically anything from one member nation to another. But it was not unchecked.
We need to stop this Brexit. It's such a disaster for everyone, particularly in places like the Highlands, which are so dependent on the EU.
The Leave campaign, however, didn't see it as a good thing. They claimed that because of EU rules, Britain had no power to stop an influx of people from other EU countries, which in turn supposedly strained public services, drove down wages, and altered the cultural makeup of communities. This narrative struck a powerful chord with many voters who felt disconnected from or distrustful of distant EU governance. The EU's principle of free movement does allow citizens of member states to move, reside, and work in other EU countries without needing a visa, but it's far from a policy of open, unregulated borders. Free movement is governed by a number of conditions and limitations. The right to move and live freely within the European Union is a key part of being an EU citizen. It's protected under Article 21 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU and Article 45 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. However, this right comes with clear rules. Said rules are often misunderstood or misrepresented in public debates, especially during the UK's Brexit campaign. Under EU law, all EU citizens and their family members can travel and reside in any other member state. According to the Free Move Directive, citizens can stay in other EU countries for up to 3 months with nothing more than a valid passport or ID card. But for those staying longer, specific conditions apply depending on the person's status. Workers, students, retirees, or those with enough resources to support themselves are all eligible, but they must follow some administrative requirements. After 5 years of legal, continuous residence, citizens gain the right to stay permanently. Family members also have the right to join or accompany EU citizens in another member state. These family members might need to fulfill some legal formalities, but they are protected under the same right of movement. Identification and residency documentation also support this system. Most EU countries issue ID cards and residence permits that help citizens prove their legal status and residence rights. A 2019 regulation improved the security of these documents by requiring biometric features like photographs and fingerprints. More recently, the EU proposed digital travel credentials. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the EU even introduced the digital COVID certificate to help citizens travel more easily. It served as a proof of vaccination, testing, or recovery. Although it expired in June 2023, it was a practical example of how the EU adapts its free movement rules to emergencies. The Leave campaign flipped the switch. They suggested that EU citizens could simply walk into the UK and access public benefits and services with no checks or balances. In reality, access to social benefits was already limited and subject to UK national laws that could be enforced within the framework of EU rules. The UK also had legal options available under the EU treaties to address cases of abuse or overuse of the system, but these were underutilised or not prominently acknowledged. While the right to move and work freely across borders is a foundational part of the EU project, it is not absolute. Right now, you're probably thinking that the UK government did nothing to stop the flow of immigrants into the country. The truth is that immigration has been and always will be a sensitive issue, especially in the United Kingdom, where there's a massive migrant population. Yes, the UK had around 10.7 million migrants, making up 16% of its total population per the results of the 2021 to 2022 census. However, no, they weren't freeloading off the country's welfare system.
Today, we are confirming that they have been, and that unequivocally, Rwanda is a safe country.
Have you ever heard of the UK-Rwanda scheme? Of course you have. It was only the most controversial government plan to have come out of Rishi Sunak's time as Prime Minister. Launched under the Conservative government in 2022, the scheme was framed as a bold solution to deter illegal migration, particularly the arrival of people via small boats across the English Channel. Supporters argued that the policy would break the business model of human smugglers and send a clear message that entering the UK illegally would no longer guarantee the right to stay. The UK's deal with Rwanda sparked outrage among human rights groups, legal professionals, and the public who questioned the morality of outsourcing asylum obligations to another country. Rwanda, while considered stable by the UK government, has a contested human rights record and limited capacity to process large number of asylum claims. The emotional weight of the issue lay in the human stories behind migration, people fleeing war, persecution, or extreme poverty, risking everything in the search of safety. A YouGov survey conducted in 2024 revealed that 60% of people in the UK believe the Rwanda plan would not effectively stop migrants from crossing the English Channel. The skepticism is even higher among Labour and Liberal Democrat supporters, with over 70% expressing doubt. Conservative voters were more divided, but only a third said they believed the scheme would work. Take a look for yourself. In another 2024 study by the think tank British Future and Focal Data, respondents were asked what outcomes would define success for the Rwanda scheme. Around 40% said small boat crossings would need to be cut by at least half, and there would need to be clear evidence that the threat of deportation to Rwanda was acting as a deterrent. Only 25% of participants said that simply seeing a plane take off with migrants on board would count as a successful outcome. Another 25% said that they were fundamentally opposed to the scheme and saw no scenario in which it would be considered a success. Consequently, the UK Supreme Court ruled in 2023 that the scheme was unlawful. The government pursued a treaty with Rwanda to address humanitarian concerns and push new legislation through Parliament to declare Rwanda legally safe. Beyond the legal and moral arguments, practical concerns were also raised. The scheme cost hundreds of millions without a single successful deportation as of 2025. With the backlog of asylum claims still growing and small boat crossings continuing, critics say the policy is more about headlines than results. Rwanda was set to receive nearly £500 million from the UK under a controversial deportation agreement, according to a report by the National Audit Office. In exchange, Rwanda agreed to accept 300 asylum seekers sent by the British government. The deal included £370 million in annual payments and an additional £120 million once 300 individuals were resettled. On top of that, the UK committed to paying £20,000 per person, with further costs reaching up to £151,000 depending on the length of their stay. Personnel and deportation expenses were also expected to cost tens of millions more. According to The Guardian, each deportation could have cost the UK up to £1.8 million. You can visualize this here. And then something interesting happened. On his first full day as Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer confirmed that the Rwanda deportation scheme was dead and buried.
Told over and over again that this would happen, that it wouldn't work, and it was just the latest Tory gimmick. But he bet everything on it, and now he's totally exposed. The central pillar of his government has crumbled beneath him. Speaking
at his first press conference as Prime Minister, Starmer argued the Rwanda scheme was never a real deterrent, noting it would have applied to less than 1% of small boat arrivals. Labour wanted to combat illegal migration by focusing on smuggling networks, though the party has yet to reveal a full plan. The UK was sold on a vision of sealed borders and reduced numbers, yet the reality tells a different story. Rising migration, unworkable policies, and billions spent chasing headlines. As the dust settles, it's clear that immigration wasn't the problem. It was the scapegoat.